Look at African writers on how they represented depression or mental illness. And Chinua Achebe is one of the leading authors who have addressed this issue. In his book, There Was a Country, he tells the story of once when a teacher allowed the village madman to take over the class and teach them the history of the town while the teacher was busy teaching them the geography of Europe. And they found that the lesson taught by the madman was actually more relevant than the geography of Europe that they were being forced to learn. In other words, according to Achebe, in traditional African society, just because somebody is insane does not mean that the person does not know something that might be wise or useful, and therefore they are treated as part of the human family rather than being locked up away from society the way Europeans were doing. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in his recent novel, The Wizard of the Crow, also looked at how the greed for money and the struggle to become more Europeanized by the elites in Africa are driving many of the elites crazy. And the only way to cure them of this madness would be to burn all the money they were burying in the fields, and burn them so that they will then become less greedy, less envious, and more try to do more healing work by respecting women rather than beating them up and locking them up, by respecting activists who are struggling to make the society a better place. Wole Soyinka also addresses in his play Madmen and Specialists, a play in which he talked about military rule by madmen, of course, who were being trained by an elderly man called as was, as is, as will ever be. And part of the training he was giving to the military rulers was teaching them how to enjoy cannibalism, how to enjoy human flesh. But the son of the elder wanted to get the powers that his father had over these powerful military rulers, but the father would not tell him the secret, so he killed his father. Maybe he wanted to marry his mother, but the women in the village would not want it, so they burned down the clinic where that doctor was torturing people to find their secrets, and so they killed him too, and killed his sister in the fire. So there was no chance for him to marry his mother after killing his father. Anomy is also a theme in one of Soyinka's novels, because it's Season of Anomy, where a revolutionary writer tried to travel across the country to find traditional African forms of socialism, and was exposed to the killing of the Igbo in the north during the pogrom, and this led him into depression, and he was locked up as being crazy in a hospital. And Soyinka is indirectly saying that anybody who witnessed that much bloodletting without being depressed is not normal. Every normal person should feel depressed by the state of African societies, especially when they engage in the genocidal killing of their fellow brothers and sisters. Buchi Emecheta in Kehinde talks about a twin whose twin was dead, but was married to a Nigerian, and the husband returned to Nigeria from London where they were working, and Kehinde was forced to relocate with him, and therefore had to face a lot of the discrimination against women that is found in African society. This made her depressed, but she found consolation by listening to the voice of her dead twin. Whereas if you said you were hearing the voice of the dead in Europe, you would actually be locked up as being insane. In Africa, it is normal to hear voices, and people will think you are actually gifted to see and hear things other people can't hear. You become a seer, a prophetess, a prophet. She also said in her interview with the reporter from the Voice newspaper in London, a black British newspaper, that she was surprised to go to a psychiatric institution where women were detained, but all the women detained except one were black women. And eventually, when the government was running out of money, they decided to release all those women, and none of those women went on to kill anybody. Bessie Head also talks in her book, A Question of Power, about depression under apartheid, where her mother, a white woman, made a baby, that is her, with a black man or colored man, and that was a crime under apartheid. So she grew up herself as a writer, suffering from depression. She drank a lot and probably drank herself to death. Amata Aido, the Ghanaian writer, in her story, Our Sister Killjoy, talks about the struggles that Africans go through in Europe and North America just to get a PhD. And a lot of them are driven to depression by racist professors who would give them lower grades even when they deserve better. And you can hear even today some of these adult PhD students crying and weeping and not eating and not sleeping because of the way they are being treated in those institutions. Aikweyamas, the beautiful ones are not yet born, of course, started with the sleeper, the boss, who had his eyes wide open because he was going to a night shift, and tells the story of the civil servant who wouldn't take bribe. And so people thought that he was crazy. Whereas the people who were trying to offer him bribe, the businessmen, were seen to be normal people. Obi Nwakama, in his biography of Okibo, Testing for Sunlight, also talks about a village madman who would march to the tune of left, right, but in Igbo, which people took to mean that he was insane or mad. Yet, when he was arrested for killing and eating vultures, he produced a legal logic in court that freed him. He asked the judge, when you people eat chicken, do I bother you? So when I'm eating vulture, what is your problem? I didn't ask you to come and chop with me, so leave me alone. But the Igbo will say, well, that is a mad person's logic, that is Onyara. However, in Igbo language, being Onyara is not the same as being depressed. The Igbo will say that somebody who's depressed is not really Onyara. Somebody who's depressed is Onye Olive. Somebody who thinks too much, who worries too much, who doesn't get enough sleep. Of course, if you worry too much, you don't get enough sleep, you don't eat well, you might go from Olili to full-blown Ara, and therefore you might become mad through the process of becoming depressed. Lambo, the first African-trained psychiatrist in the 1950s, was able to set up a village for the treatment of the mentally ill and depressed people. Arrow Village, it is called. There he argued that in African society, we do not treat the individual who is ill, we treat the whole person in the context of the whole community. And so he allowed families to come visit the people who are undergoing psychiatric care. But later in the 1980s, because of the way the rulers of Nigeria were behaving, the military rulers, Lambo called for a psychiatric test for future leaders. They should pass a psychiatric test. Although that did not happen, many people like Fela would say that the leaders were, as the Yoruba would say, they were mad. That is, they were mad. But I don't know if the word were Yoruba is also the word for depression. Maybe depression is a mild form of were. It could actually lead to full-blown insanity, if you like. Ruth Chigwada is a criminologist from Zimbabwe in the UK, and she wrote in one of her chapters that black women are over-diagnosed with mental illness by the British system. The way it works is you go to court, and the court will ask the doctor to examine you, and if the doctor decides that you are mentally ill, then you will be detained in a psychiatric hospital for treatment, which is a form of punishment. Sisi Dangarambe, another Zimbabwean writer, also wrote the book Nervous Condition, to talk about a black girl in Zimbabwe who was trying to advance her studies and who was not allowed to do so or supported fully because she was a girl, and so she had a nervous breakdown.